Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about unretirement. That's what I'm calling my coming out of retirement back into being employed rather than calling it reemployed or unretire. Well, I guess I do call it unretirement. That's what I call it. Several people asked, what is that? What's going on? What's it like? I'll have to explain a bit more about my semi retirement to make the unretirement make sense. But I do have a few videos on me being semi-retired, and I'll link them below so you can watch those. But in short, what happened was when I moved to Seattle in 2020, Obsidian told me that they weren't prepared to have out-of-state employees. So I got switched to being a contractor. And I was fine. I was fine with that. This was before I had my YouTube channel, and it was right in the middle of COVID. This was June of 2020. So what happened was, for a few months, I don't think anybody knew my status had changed, except a few people that I worked with at Obsidian. But occasionally I'd talk to friends who worked at different companies, text messages, occasional video call, and the word spread that I was now a contractor. And then I got an email from someone I'd worked with before, and he said, I just have one question for you. Is your contract exclusive? And I looked at it and it wasn't. I think I looked at it before I signed it. So I think I just answered him like, no, it's not exclusive. And so he said, I have someone who wants to talk to you. That's when I started getting a lot of calls. What was interesting to me is I can characterize all these calls are from people who had already made games before. They were all well established. You would know the names of people I'm telling you about. But I'm not, because NDA. These people called and basically were working on a project and wanted my help with it in various parts of the project or stages. I mean, I've done so much stuff. Some people were just asking questions, even though I didn't like write conversations. They wanted to know how to make a dialogue system, which I did code. They wanted to know, some of their questions were design related, a few were code related. How did you guys do this in the code? And I would talk to them about it. It was so much fun. These projects were wildly different. The people I talked to were different and different than how I would do it. Their personalities were different. The kind of games they were making were different. Their actual development process is different, which is why I just want to stress here that there is no one right way to make a game. I tell you my way, which I think works well, especially for RPGs, but it's not the way. And it may not be the way for you. You may need to take my way and modify it a little bit. You may need to take my way and throw it completely out and find your own process. But it was fun for me to see how these other game companies and game developers did their work. One was very level design forward. They didn't proceed the way we did, where I told you I did the setting and then the story and then the system mechanics. Before they even had the story worked out and only some general idea for system mechanics, they started laying out maps because they wanted to, they thought very much of flow in terms of environmental flow. Where will the player go? What leads them to the next place? If there's a combat here, what's interesting about this space? It was a really interesting thing to watch. And I often had questions like, well, you don't have your system mechanics done, but you seem to be assuming you're going to have cover mechanics. And I would ask them questions like that, and sometimes they'd look at each other and go, we're having cover mechanics, right? And the other one was, I don't know, we haven't decided that yet. It was just interesting, and that was, by the way, part of my value was, I see you doing something, and it has an underlying assumption. Is that true? Because either you should put a pin in the assumption and make it a actual mechanic, or you level designers should stop doing that. And I think just doing that, I can think of at least one company that I probably saved quite a bit of money when it turned out an assumption was not something that they were going to do. So a level was being designed assuming a system mechanic was going to be created that they had no intention of making. One thing I loved about doing this, though, was a lot of these projects, they were either full-on RPGs, or they were action RPGs, or they were a game with a really strong RPG element. Because there are a lot of games now love to pull things in from RPGs, like player agency and multiple endings and skills controlling certain things. They'd run into similar issues that I'd run into multiple times in multiple games. And one advantage I had was I couldn't say, hey, I think you should do this, because I'd run into that problem in multiple games and tried solving it in multiple ways. I could tell them things like, this is what worked for me and this is what failed and why. Not some hypothetical, I think this is going to be a problem for you. This is the problem we ran into. If you guys are clever, and I think you're more clever than me, you might be able to fix it. But you will run into this problem and you will have to fix it. So it was interesting because a lot of my discussions weren't hypothetical, which they had gotten from other contractors. They're like, well, I'm worried this might happen. I didn't say I was worried this might happen. I'm like, oh, this is what happened. Oh, you're doing these two things? They will intersect and cause this issue. Happened in all my games. I tried solving it in different ways. But what I loved most about this is these people had already dove deep into their games. They had done this stuff like this before. They were making a new game. They had already put a lot of stuff together and they had questions. Very, very deep questions, like foundational level questions. And if you watch my video on the joy of doing, those are the very people I like working with. This wasn't somebody going, hey, Tim, I had an idea. What do you think of my idea? It was, hey, Tim, we've got this team together, and this is our basic premise for the game, and we've put together these levels and these mechanics, but we're running into some problems, and we'd love you to take a look at it and tell us what you think. That was awesome. In fact, there was one place I was working where at one point they said, can you log in tomorrow and play the game for a couple hours while we watch? I'm like, who's we? And I'm like, oh, it's just some people. Like, I'm going to watch you. The game director is going to watch you. And I'm going to have a level designer watch you. I'm going to have a system mechanics guy watch you. And I'm like, okay. So I start playing the game and they had their mics on. And I'm playing the game. And at one point they're like, why is he doing that? Wait, why did he go in that way? What's he doing? Why is he doing that? And I could hear what he was saying, and I didn't respond. I was playing the game in a way they didn't intend, but was perfectly possible by what was possible for my player character. I think I ended up, there was a tower that you were supposed to pick the lock on or go find the guard and get the key from him somehow. I discovered I could climb part of the tower. And I was climbing up the side of the tower and I got to a window that was open and I should have been able to get into. Now I couldn't, but it looked like I could and I could climb to it. So basically it was a good example of your game led me to do this thing and led me to believe I could do this thing. The visual language was wrong. That window shouldn't look like I can go through it if I can't. That was the issue, not, hey, we should include climbing as another solution. I mean, if they want that, they could. But the real problem was that window shouldn't have looked like I could go through it if I couldn't. What I loved about all these places was I could help because I've gone deep and I know that there's a lot of superficial solutions that look like they'll be awesome and they don't work. This is something that I see junior designers often have the problem with, especially if I've seen junior designers whose egos are bigger than they should be based on their experience. They just think, I'm clever. All designers before me were idiots. I've solved this. And then they try a solution that I've tried literally half a dozen times. And they run into the same problems that I've seen half a dozen times. So what I kind of helped these companies do was avoid those potholes. And let me tell you, there's a lot of value in having someone go, you know, the lane you're in, I've driven down here before, and there's a huge pothole you're about to hit. You either want to switch lanes, slow down, swerve, whatever, but that pothole is going to mess you up if you just go into it at this speed. So now let me get to Unretirement. So that's what I was doing. I was doing all that before my channel. Then I started my channel, kept doing that other stuff. And then let me talk about Unretirement. At one point, I did talk to Obsidian about switching back to being an employee. And I had a bunch of reasons I don't really want to go into. But one of them was, when you're a contractor, you're constantly looking for the next thing, which some people love. They're like, oh, I'm on something different every few months. For me, I was like, I don't like jumping something different every few months. One contract isn't enough to sustain the work. So you have to have multiple contracts, which means you have to be able to context switch. There was one time where I had 2 meetings back to back, different places, wildly different projects. I had to stop one call and start another one and switch gears, switch design gears. They had different design goals. They had wildly different games. That's not for everyone. I loved it, but there wasn't enough of that out there. So unretirement for me at Obsidian brought a lot of things that I love. First of all, I'm back in the office physically. I like that. I know some of you don't. Some of you are like, no, Tim, remote work is wonderful and perfect. I'm not going to get into that again, but remote work isn't all sunshine and lollipops, and it doesn't work for everybody. It just doesn't. If you think it does and you argue it does, I either think you don't know all the data, or you just want to stay remote for your own personal reasons and you're trying to turn it into a professional reason. I get it. For some people, remote's awesome, and I get why you're fighting for it. It doesn't work for everyone. Acknowledge that, or you're going to be an awful lead when people come to you who have different priorities in their life, and you're like, I acknowledge none of it. This is the way it is. Oh, by the way, I'm not in charge of a project. I'm not a director. You can think of it as more of a consultant. It's like what I was doing in semi-retirement, but exclusive, just for Obsidian, and a lot deeper, because I will dive deep into some systems that I plan to stay with them through to completion. Where with a lot of the contracts, I come in, see some problems, suggest some solutions, they select one, and I'm done. But one of the things I really, really like about Unretirement is all of the spontaneous discussions I've already had. I've been there now for 7 weeks. I've had a lot of spontaneous discussions. Some people would just come by my office and just go, hey, I just want to say hi, I want to introduce myself. Some of them said they watched my channel. Some of them just said, oh, I started right when you were leaving and I wanted to meet you. I usually ask them what they do. You know, what's your role and what project are you on? The next thing, we're talking about their project in detail. Often we end up on a problem they've encountered. Like, I talked to a level designer. I'm not a level designer. But she was telling me about something she ran into, and I said, oh, well, you know, if you ever, I have a video about level design I learned by going to Disneyland a lot, and there was this thing I learned. And we talked about that, and it's fun because I'm not their boss. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just saying, hey, here's another way of looking at it. Here's a light you can shine on it that shows you a different way of looking at it. You don't have to do it. I got no dog in this hunt. But if you ever want to talk about it, I love talking about this stuff. Because of that, I've now talked to an artist. Yeah, colorblind programmer Tim talked to an artist because we were talking about low-hanging fruit, things that would be trivial for him to do artistically that no mechanic took advantage of. Oh, system mechanic? You're telling me some stuff that's easy to do artistically and a system mechanic could be attached to it, and we have to come up with some new mechanics? That I'm on that. I played a prototype of a game and saw a mechanic in it that I was like, I love this. I have a lot of questions about it. And then I gave them all my questions. There was a lot of questions. And it wasn't, I don't like this. I don't understand it. It was like, are you going to extend it this way? Can you do this? Will it ever be possible to do this? Do you think the player will ever try to do this with the mechanic? It was all these things that I love the mechanic, but I wanted them to think about these things so that A, the mechanic could be used more often and be even more fun than it was. But also, I do see a couple issues that might happen, and if you haven't thought about it, maybe you want to think about this. These conversations would never have happened over a video call. How do I know? Because they never happened over video calls. If I have a whole video called The Importance of Conversation. And I will tell you right now, if you don't think that's important, if you don't see why that is important, I don't think I can explain it to you. I think some of you just have a blocker, and you can't acknowledge that in-person conversation can be different than a video call conversation, or you don't acknowledge that it has any advantages. There are disadvantages. I agree. But there are advantages too. And if you don't think there are any, then I believe you have some kind of blocker up. Because just in the last 7 weeks, I've had so many interesting conversations with artists, level designer, narrative designers, system mechanics guys, and even one person who primarily kind of does audio stuff, primarily. But they were all conversations that wouldn't have happened. They happened to just swing by to say hi, or I ran into them in the kitchen because they do a bagel day. And Uncle Tim doesn't need to eat a bagel every morning, but dang, Uncle Tim likes a bagel once a week. But now I'm thinking about bagels, in case you're wondering. But the conversation just happened there. We're both looking at all the big variety. I'm trying to figure out which are blueberry and which are raisin, which is really hard to do when you're colorblind. Then there's a bunch of flavored cream cheeses. So you're up at the counter for a while, and we start talking. that stuff would never have happened. It was completely spontaneous, and it's part of what I love about being in person again. Anyway, that's kind of what my unretirement is now. It's me still doing what I did as a contractor, but in person, exclusively at one place, and way deeper and easy to get follow-up. Somebody has a question, they don't have to schedule a meeting with me and a call and see how much it's going to cost, and say, hey, do we have any hours left on Tim's contract for this week? They just swing by my office, or they Slack me and go, hey, I got a question about this. And we try to do it there. And if it's not working, I'm like, let me come by and we'll chat. I love this. I love it. It's what fits me well for this stage of my career. And I'd like to think I'm helping out a lot of people in their stages of their careers. Anyway, that's what unretirement is like for this guy.